Penguin Random House Audio presents The Singularity is Near, When Humans Transcend Biology, by Ray Kurzweil. Read for you by George K. Wilson.
Prologue. The Power of Ideas. I do not think there is any thrill that can go through the human heart like that felt by the inventor as he sees some creation of the brain unfolding to success. Nikola Tesla, 1896, inventor of alternating current. At the age of 5, I had the idea that I would become an inventor. I had the notion that inventions could change the world. When other kids were wondering aloud what they wanted to be, I already had the conceit that I knew what I was going to be. The rocket ship to the moon that I was then building, almost a decade before President Kennedy's challenge to the nation, did not work out. But at around the time I turned 8, my inventions became a little more realistic, such as a robotic theater with mechanical linkages that could move scenery and characters in and out of view, and virtual baseball games. Having fled the Holocaust, my parents, both artists, wanted a more worldly, less provincial religious upbringing for me. My spiritual education, as a result, took place in a Unitarian church. We would spend 6 months studying one religion, going to its services, reading its books, having dialogues with its leaders, and then move on to the next. The theme was Many Paths to the Truth. I noticed, of course, many parallels among the world's religious traditions, but even the inconsistencies were illuminating. It became clear to me that the basic truths were profound enough to transcend apparent contradictions. At the age of 8, I discovered the Tom Swift Jr. series of books. The plots of all of the 33 books, only 9 of which had been published when I started to read them in 1956, were always the same. Tom would get himself into a terrible predicament in which his fate and that of his friends, and often the rest of the human race, hung in the balance. Tom would then retreat to his basement lab and think about how to solve the problem. This, then, was the dramatic tension in each book in the series. What ingenious idea would Tom and his friends come up with to save the day? The moral of these tales was simple. The right idea had the power to overcome a seemingly overwhelming challenge. To this day, I remain convinced of this basic philosophy. No matter what quandaries we face, business problems, health issues, relationship difficulties, as well as the great scientific, social, and cultural challenges of our time, there is an idea that can enable us to prevail. Furthermore, we can find that idea. And when we find it, we need to implement it. My life has been shaped by this imperative, the power of an idea. This is itself an idea. Around the same time that I was reading the Tom Swift Jr. series, I recall my grandfather, who had also fled Europe with my mother, coming back from his first return visit to Europe with 2 key memories. One was the gracious treatment he received from the Austrians and Germans, the same people who had forced him to flee in 1938. The other was a rare opportunity he had been given to touch with his own hands some original manuscripts of Leonardo da Vinci. Both recollections influenced me, but the latter is one I've returned to many times. He described the experience with reverence, as if he had touched the work of God himself. This, then, was the religion that I was raised with, veneration for human creativity and the power of ideas. In 1960, at the age of 12, I discovered the computer and became fascinated with its ability to model and recreate the world. I hung around the surplus electronics stores on Canal Street in Manhattan. They're still there, and gathered parts to build my own computational devices. During the 1960s, I was as absorbed in the contemporary musical, cultural, and political movements as my peers, but I became equally engaged in a much more obscure trend, namely the remarkable sequence of machines that IBM proffered during that decade, from their big 7000 series, 7070, 7074, 7090, 7094, to their small 1620, effectively the first mini-computer. The machines were introduced at yearly intervals, and each one was less expensive and more powerful than the last, a phenomenon familiar today. I got access to an IBM 1620 and began to write programs for statistical analysis and subsequently for music composition. I still recall the time in 1968 when I was allowed into the secure, cavernous chamber housing what was then the most powerful computer in New England, a top-of-the-line IBM 360 Model 91 with a remarkable 1,000,000 bytes, 1 megabyte of core memory, an impressive speed of 1,000,000 instructions per second, 1 MIPS, and a rental cost of only $1,000 per hour. I had developed a computer program that matched high school students to colleges, and I watched in fascination as the front panel lights danced through a distinctive pattern as the machine processed each student's application. Even though I was quite familiar with every line of code, it nonetheless seemed as if the computer were deep in thought when the lights dimmed for several seconds at the denouement of each such cycle. Indeed, it could do flawlessly in 10 seconds what took us 10 hours to do manually with far less accuracy. As an inventor in the 1970s, I came to realize that my inventions needed to make sense in terms of the enabling technologies and market forces that would exist when the inventions were introduced, as that world would be a very different one from the one in which they were conceived. I began to develop models of how distinct technologies, electronics, communications, computer processors, memory, magnetic storage, and others, developed, and how these changes rippled through markets and ultimately our social institutions. I realized that most inventions fail not because the R&D department can't get them to work, but because the timing is wrong. Inventing is a lot like surfing. You have to anticipate and catch the wave at just the right moment. My interest in technology, trends, and their implications took on a life of its own in the 1980s, and I began to use my models to project and anticipate future technologies, innovations that would appear in 2000, 2010, 2020, and beyond. This enabled me to invent with the capabilities of the future by conceiving and designing inventions using these future capabilities. In the mid to late 1980s, I wrote my first book, The Age of Intelligent Machines. It included extensive and reasonably accurate predictions for the 1990s and 2000s, and ended with the specter of machine intelligence becoming indistinguishable from that of its human progenitors within the first half of the 21st century. It seemed like a poignant conclusion, and in any event I personally found it difficult to look beyond so transforming an outcome. Over the last 20 years, I have come to appreciate an important meta-idea, that the power of ideas to transform the world is itself accelerating. And although people readily agree with this observation when it is simply stated, relatively few observers truly appreciate its profound implications. Within the next several decades, we will have the opportunity to apply ideas to conquer age-old problems and introduce a few new problems along the way. During the 1990s, I gathered empirical data on the apparent acceleration of all information-related technologies and sought to refine the mathematical models underlying these observations. I developed a theory I call the law of accelerating returns, which explains why technology and evolutionary processes in general progress in an exponential fashion. In the age of spiritual machines,
Sample complete. Ready to continue?